You want to provide your commander with the best information so that they can fully explain why they need it so badly. You're basically educating them. You're educating and informing. You're getting the info so that they can educate and inform the congressman. Hi, my name is Vanessa Savas, and I am the president of Delphi World Group, which is a government relations and consulting company.
Welcome today, Vanessa. Happy to have you here. And
Thanks.
we met in San Diego.
Yes, that was great to meet you then.
And we met, tell us about the event that we were at for people who don't know listening to this.
So we were at a ringmaster. It was an event hosted by Gene Moran, kind of an invite-only ringmaster event, he calls it. And Gene and I have been colleagues and friends for a little while. Basically, he brings together CEOs of different companies, businesses, and talks about government relations, which he also is involved with and has done for many, many years and is a real pro. And he talks about lots of different things and exposes people to the nuances of working with the government, how things work. He tries to educate. Some people already are in the process, but he brings so they can talk amongst each other, learn from each other as well, and basically, trade stories, understand better what everybody is doing in their spaces. People can learn and collaborate a little bit. I think that's what Gene would say. I won't speak for him, but that's what I have seen at the event, and I think it's an excellent event. I really appreciate what he's done there.
No, I enjoyed it thoroughly. Met some great people there. In fact, you're one of them. We've actually done some follow-up, and I think my team has a meeting with another group from that event as well today, simultaneously, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, outstanding.
So again, you're bringing CEOs from different industries and space. What happened to be your area of expertise?
So my area of expertise is in the congressional arena and helping folks work with Congress. I try to help businesses, small and large, engage in the congressional relations space, basically. A lot of people don't know, and they're often just targeting the executive branch and the agency when it comes to trying to get their services or their products into the government space. They want to work with the government. They may or may not know exactly how to engage them. Sometimes they'll have business development teams who are pursuing various contracts, trying to get on a contract with the government, whether it's for a service or one of their products. But they're possibly not looking at the congressional piece, which happens every year as well. And in fact, we're just starting to kick off the cycle now, which starts when the president sends over his annual budget to Congress. So I focus on that, and it's based on my experience in the military. I actually started to do congressional relations when I was an Air Force reservist. I began within the Air Force. I actually worked at the Senate office, and a lot of people don't know this, but they have small offices on the Hill in the Senate and in the House of Representatives with the purpose of maintaining a relationship between congressional staffers and members and the Pentagon, who can answer their questions. So we would be placed there so that they could come to us. They start to trust us, understand, we are the ones communicating with them. Then we can bring over maybe some subject matter experts who may be able to explain the programs and the asks more appropriately. And that's how I started. That then evolved into a job where I worked right here, I'm in Miami today, in fact, and I was one of their military deputies in their congressional program at Southern Command. U.S. Southern Command is down here in Miami. The commander also has programs, and he needs to execute, and they need money to do this and funding. So we have to justify why we need the things we say we need as a Department of Defense official, and that relationship with Congress is very important. Finally, I ended up working within OSD up at the Pentagon, again in congressional relations space. This time, whereas sometimes you're working more with the authorization committee, you will work a little bit with the appropriations committee. This was really devoted primarily to the appropriations side of the House and the appropriations committees. And when you work with them, I was working specifically in the comptroller, I was their liaison to the committee, and we all have different portfolios. But basically, at that time, I worked the war funding. I worked a lot of the training programs, international programs, those sort of things. And in doing so, we were often struggling back and forth. You can imagine there's a lot of contentious accounts and needs during wartime, anytime you're working with international training programs. And you have to be able to clearly articulate the need, what's important, and why they should do it. Because Congress has a say in everything that's happening within all the agencies. And this happens every year. So it's that kind of experience is what led me into starting my own business, actually quite accidentally.
So you said you could clearly articulate the need, and what else?
So basically what happens is anytime any of the government agencies, I'm going to use DoD as the example going forward, the Department of Defense will have a need for something. It might be a service, it might be a product, it might be they want a weapon system, or they need to increase the numbers in a weapon system. Say it's, I'm Air Force, so we'll say, I don't know, they want to buy more F-35s. They have to be able to explain to Congress. Congress may only want to give a certain number of F-35s. They might not understand why it's important. Or let's say it's even just a service contract for somebody providing service to the warfighter, any kind of service. They may think that it's either too expensive or they don't really need something. They don't need that particular service. But oftentimes the government wants it, needs it. So that becomes a requirement. And that's what gets rolled into the budget that ultimately will go to the Hill. The process is actually, it's a long process before something ends up in the budget that goes up to the Hill. There's a lot of iterations. I mean, the Air Force, the Navy, the Marines, they all want things, right? So they have to compete though at the top. And actually within OSD Comptroller, a lot of that competition happens within, the Secretary of Defense, the Joint Staff, everybody's vying for what they need. And finally, they get that settled within the Department of Defense. But then when it goes up to the White House, now they're looking at all the agencies as they're building the budget. And again, there's going to be back and forth because there will be some disagreement on maybe things that were sent up with the Department of Defense. Maybe another department needs something and they start juggling the money back and forth at that level as well. Finally, when that's all said and done, that budget is what goes over, and that is known as the president's budget that is sent to the White House. And then here's where Congress has the say. And this is actually the beginning of a year-long iteration, usually about 9 months, usually. Of course, like you can look at now, we're in a continuing resolution, which basically means we're still operating. We haven't gotten funding for FY24 yet. We're still operating under FY23. It's a continuance of those funds. And now, eventually, hopefully we'll get the bill. But typically, the idea is that the bill will be complete by the 1st of October. And then we would have monies to start with the new fiscal year. So it is a complicated process. And that's what I try to do, actually. I try to help people understand this process. Okay. I know I said a lot there. I try to lead them step by step through the process. And most importantly, I try to help them understand how to work with Congress, what are the key points to working with Congress, and what they can expect and how important the relationship could be for them. Because truthfully, you have to sometimes accelerate. Like I said, the budget process could take 2-3 years to get something up and approved. Whereas with Congress, they're going to approve it that year, and there could be monies that are spent immediately after the budget is passed.
Oh, okay.
The bill is passed, I should say. Yes.
So, budget process could take 2 to 3 years.
Yes, it does. There's always basically it's starting with the need, then a requirement is put out. They have a need for this requirement. They set it forth. Hey, this is our requirement. And then they start to push it through up into the budget. And that's where all the services are putting together their own little budgets. Then it will come together at OSD Comptroller. And it can get really contentious. I mean, they're going back and forth, and the highest, the most important items will get the Secretary of Defense attention. Sometimes that it'll be made at that level with the comptroller before it is decided upon. And it's Secretary of Defense, the Joint Staff, the Chairman of the Joint Staff, but it will then ultimately go to the Office of Management and Budget, which we call OMB. And again, it gets jockeyed around there within the other agencies' requests, basically. I said requirements, really requests at this point. And ultimately, the final budget goes over. At Congress, that's where it gets really interesting, because I'm happy to talk about that if you'd like, a little bit about what's happening then when they get it.
Yeah, I'd say let's come back to that, what happens at Congress, because I'm going to make a note of it to come back. What I like to do is back up a little bit and give people a little bit back of your history, that you retired Air Force Colonel, you spent 29 years in the Department of Defense, right? Let's talk a little about your history and background that led you up to these positions, right? So let's back up and talk about your exciting career of 29 years with DOD. Where did you start, right? You got into all this stuff. Where did you start? I know you were military.
Okay. Yes. So actually, I had always wanted to be a pilot. I was lucky to get picked to go to the Air Force Academy. And then after that, I went to pilot training and I became a pilot. I served as a pilot for 10 years, and that was on active duty. When I decided to make the leap and get out of active duty, I then joined the reserve as a part-time reservist initially for 5 years. I was part-time, and that was actually when I was sitting in the Senate liaison office. So I was working in my civilian capacity, totally as a civilian, and then I would go up to the Air Force and put on my Air Force hat and work in the Senate liaison office. And I did that for 5 years. So I got to see a lot of interesting dynamics there. And I saw one piece of the puzzle. So after I got an opportunity, after about 5 years, I got an opportunity to go full-time back into the Air Force Reserve again. It was as a reservist, but it was going to be full-time. So that's where I started to get some other full-time jobs in different agencies. I actually went to USAFE first. I worked for 4 months. It was actually 3rd Air Force, but they work very closely with USAFE over in Europe. I was in Germany. I was working theater security cooperation, which was very interesting and something new for me. And then I came down to Southern Command, where I was hired to be the academic outreach person at the command. But shortly after my arrival, actually, the Haiti earthquake happened. So I ended up being brought in because of my experience as an airlifter and some other civilian experiences I had. I started to work with the NGOs to help advise them on what the biggest needs were in Haiti, to make sure that the biggest needs were actually what was being sent over during the earthquake.
What does that mean, the biggest need?
So a lot of the non-governmental organizations, they'll respond to natural disasters. And I actually at this time knew nothing about natural disaster response. But what happens is, as I learned very quickly, is they're going to go over and help anyway. In fact, I don't know if you remember, but when this happened in Haiti, there were all these different groups trying to fly in. There wasn't much space. They were bringing things they thought were important, but there's actually, a group that USAID typically coordinates the U.S. response, but there's a group that they'll basically go in on the ground and they'll assess, hey, what is the most important need? Is it medical supplies? Is it food? Is it water? What do they really need here? So that these non-government organizations, even though they want to do good and they're trying to do good, They don't want to have everybody either bringing over the same thing, more importantly, bringing over things that really aren't critical. There was a time where water and food was the most important, but then that quickly changed over to medical supplies. It could be lots of things. It could be shelters. A lot of times shelter, obviously in Haiti, was very difficult. And they were concerned, when the rains would start coming, what would they have? So this group within the USAID is putting this together, and they're trying to help coordinate all the good meaning and well-meaning NGOs who are trying to go in and provide help.
Okay.
So my job, it was funny, initially my job was to just get with the NGOs would call our desk and they would want to go in. They were trying to get slot times to go into the airfield, which were extremely limited. And the slot times were being coordinated in a different location. But the key was if they had goods, in fact, even trying to take people back and forth, if they didn't have the right people or goods on, they weren't going to probably get a slot time. So I could at least help them to know what the need was. Maybe then they can reach out to their different vendors to get the goods that were really most critical. And then they would stand a better chance to possibly get a time slot. And in fact, at that point, the international community was actually monitoring it because, of course, everybody wanted to help. It wasn't just the US, even though we were so close. It was, people from all over Asia, Europe. So they actually ended up having some teamwork there to make sure that the right things were going in and it wasn't just one-sided also.
That's interesting. I didn't know that our government got that involved in it.
Yeah. So what happens, in fact, actually, we had trying to think, we stood up I want to say if it was a joint task force, but basically we had a 2-star deputy at Southern Command who was in charge of all of what the U.S. military was doing on the ground at that time. And in fact, worked very closely with the UN commander. It was a Brazilian general. They had even, in fact, this was very, very interesting. They had known each other in a school that they had attended together. And thankfully for that relationship, which I think is really key, relationships are so important. They're important not only in Congress, but like in this situation. And it was based on trust. And I'll relay that later into the congressional work and dealings. But basically, because this relationship between these two men, when they were majors in their services in the U.S. and Brazilian, both, I think, Army, they happened to be there on the ground together. And in fact, the Air Force or the Army general who was there was literally there just doing a normal visit, as often our commanders or deputy commanders will do around the region that they're, where they have military, where they're, trying to, I don't even say military, but just trying to maintain relations with various countries that they work with. And they happened to both be there, and they were able to come together quickly to start critically providing for the needs on the ground. And yeah, I wrote a thesis on this actually, because it was so interesting to me. Yeah, I actually went to school right after that for about a year. We have a school up in Montgomery, Alabama, and it was kind of a perfect lead-in for me where I got to talk about my experiences in the thesis, because I knew nothing about humanitarian disaster and humanitarian relief efforts. And I got to basically watch it from A to Z, how the operation within the military even ramps up, how the civilians on the ground work, how they try to come together. It's never perfect, but I will say, I think it would have been, there's always criticisms about various aspects, and they learn in each natural disaster. I don't know if you remember, whether it's the tsunami that happened in Japan or the tsunami in Indonesia, there's always going to be lessons learned. But overall, at least I was very fortunate to get to work with amazing people at Southern Command during that time. I was able to watch an operation from beginning to end, or at least back to kind of more of a normal maintenance operation. And then I was glad I was able to study that and then produce a thesis on it. So Yeah.
Oh, that's nice. That's nice.
Yeah.
All right. So what I'd like to do, and I know we took a little break there real quick, going back, expand more on, okay, like why did they put you in that position to help, right, with the earthquake and aid? Like what experiences did you have prior to that would say, okay, let's hire Vanessa for that role? Like, I mean, there's a lot. I've been in Southern Command. There's a lot of people there. That was that 1,000 people in that building.
Yeah. A little more, about 1,500. Yeah. 1,500
So
usually.
why did they
Yeah.
pick you? Like, what made you the authority?
What's really funny, it's so funny you asked me that because, um, like I said, I was there to do academic outreach and work with the universities to try to bring some students in who were really, excited to work with the command and so that they could learn. But what happened was all of a sudden that we just had the same organization. They worked with these businesses. They actually did this whole organization, this little group I worked with. They worked with businesses and they worked with non-governmental organizations. And all of a sudden, when the earthquake happened, they just started calling our organization. And the guy who normally worked the air piece of it and who was the Air Force point of contact, he was deployed. So, they see me in my flight suit and they're like, Air Force, hey, you come here, sit in this seat and literally just start taking phone calls, get the people's names and phone numbers and start writing it down and tell them we'll call them back as soon as we, have the grand plan. So that's literally what I did. I literally sat down at this desk, I didn't know anything about this part of our little group that was working. I had just learned the academic piece of it because I had just gotten there. I was only there probably 2-3 months when this happened. And, I'm just learning my job. So now, but the funny thing was, I didn't realize it at the time, but I actually was really well suited for this. And I was well suited for a few reasons. When I started flying, my first assignment was as a C-5 cargo pilot. So I knew basically all we do is we take things all over the world. We transport goods and weapons, and it's a big transport plane, basically. So anything you can get in the back of it,
Opens up like a valve at the back.
Yeah. The mouth in the front, it opens both ways.
Oh,
right.
really? Oh,
the front, it opens up. Yeah, it's actually great. I love it. It's the biggest plane that we have in the Air Force. So, and it's almost, I'd say, 2 inches shy of being the biggest plane in the world. But so it's a huge, huge plane, and I flew for 3 years. I loved it. Was really interesting. You fly all over. And so you get to know, what you need when you land on the ground with that plane and what do you need to take everything off. And by the way, okay, the C-5 is the C-5 coming in? Well, that's going to take up a ton of ramp space. And how many other planes can you get in? So you learn about that kind of operation. And then I actually, in my civilian job, I had been flying for various airlines, and I flew passengers and I also flew cargo. And when I did that, I learned about what it takes for regular civilian operations to go in. And at one point, even in Haiti, it turned out, the airlines were starting to fly in, and they didn't, because of the devastation, they didn't have the normal stairs that they would have. They didn't have some of the K loaders to take the goods off and on the plane. And they had to try and figure out what was there on the ground and how they could share to make this operation work. So it was really funny because I understand those nuances. So I would talk with some of the people on the ground in Haiti who we had deployed to the airfield to help work these operations, and calling back and forth, we would figure out, okay, well, other people were trying to figure out what was the number of planes they could have max. That wasn't really my priority, and they were working those with the people on the ground. But the people on the ground would say, sometimes they'd just call me because they knew I understood and I could go even relay to some of the others and say, hey, they don't have the basic equipment to get the stuff off. And that's why initially Haiti, it took a while for that machine to kind of become more finely tuned, but in primary reason was because so many things got destroyed, including, the tower. They couldn't control the planes easily. So they literally initially, when they first started the air operations, they literally had guys on the ground with walkie-talkie style radios communicating with the planes coming in. I mean, it was really unbelievable what went on in that operation and how they worked. Those air traffic controllers that they brought in, I'm pretty sure they were Air Force air traffic controllers, but don't quote me. But yeah, they were Air Force. They were our Air Force. I just don't remember exactly which base they were from. But they came in on the ground and they're literally conducting operations from chairs and desks on the ground, getting these planes in and then the planes, it would be so slow to offload all this equipment because they just didn't have the ability to do it and quickly. And then slowly they would bring in the things they needed. And like any operation, it starts to generate speed and it got smoother. Yeah.
I think a lot of us, we don't consider that, right? We're thinking, we're just taking stuff over there. But like you said, if you don't even have forklifts to offload it, then you can only take so much, you can only receive so much stuff.
Right. Right.
You're manually offloading the stuff. If you don't have pallet jacks and stuff to move pallets around, yeah, that's got to be.
Yeah. And then only one plane at a time could basically go in and out because of the way the airfield was. So you had to really closely time that. And people were, if somebody got stuck there and the ramp space was so limited. So yeah, it was an amazing operation to watch unfold.
I think that if a lot more people had that perspective, they might have a lot more empathy about.
Exactly, because there was a lot of criticism, but I think a lot of people don't understand how difficult something like that is. And I'm not saying it was perfect, but I am saying I think that people did the best they could and that's usually what happens in these humanitarian disasters and that's why there's lessons learned that come out of it and you try to improve and they try, and I think that they do, they do improve as they go along. So, and like I said, USAID, the folks who work within that organization, they're working with the greater international community to try to make it all come together. And they're used to doing that. That's what those people do. That's their job. They work together and they try to make it come together smoothly.
No, that's great. So now from there, where did you go? So you helped with the humanitarian.
Yeah. So I went to school for a year. I went to the School of Advanced Air and Space Studies up in Montgomery, Alabama, and then I went up to the Pentagon and I worked in like a long range strategy for a little bit. And then I came back and that was just for a year. And then I came back to Southern Command because they had an opening. I mean, it was almost unbelievable. Like I just happened, they had an opening. I loved being there, first of all. It was close to my family. My parents were really failing at the time. They were elderly. And they lived over in the Tampa Bay area. So I was trying to get back to Florida so that I could help them in some way. And by some miracle, this job just happened to open up. I didn't even know about it until it was almost closed. And I saw it, I applied for it, and I got it. And I think they liked that I had been at Southcom before, and they wanted, and that I already had some congressional experience, even though it hadn't been full time. But I also had worked at another, one of the Air Force, our 3rd Air Force. So I had a little bit of experience outside of like the basic wing level. And so they hired me and it was great. I had great bosses. I mean, I loved it. I learned a lot because you're really doing a lot. You're working, you have a lot of exposure to the 4-star general. And that was something, you have that often in this arena because these are the people who are going up to talk to the members or testify at hearings. But really, the whole job there was we needed to get the money and we needed to get the policy changes we needed to do what we had to do within the area that we worked within. So, whether we're partnering with partners from Brazil or Argentina or Colombia, we need a certain amount of money to do all that. And that's what we were, hopefully trying to get and justify. So that's what I did for 4 years down there.
What is that position called, the title?
So at that time I was, what was it called? At that time I was the military deputy of congressional affairs.
No.
So we have a director, and then we have a military deputy that sits at the command, and we have a civilian deputy that sits actually in one of our offices in Washington, D.C. It's a very small office. There's only usually 4 or 5 people in the office. And we work very closely with the commander and their staff. We work a lot within the organization itself. So the commander needs information, and in this case, it's congressional, that he needs to know what he needs to talk about with Congress. So we have to get the information from the operations branch or the intelligence branch, or you name it, the exercise branch. So they all provide information to us, and we sort through what Congress is going to care about most. We try to help prepare the general so that when he goes every year, the combatant commander has to go testify to Congress, and that's getting ready to happen now too. So I imagine right now they're in the middle of this process, this huge process to, get the commander spun up so that he or she can go and talk to the Congress about what they're doing, why, and like oftentimes what happens is the Congress has something that they don't like that you've been doing. They're coming to visit our command too. So they're coming down on visits. They're called congressional delegations, or sometimes the member doesn't come and only the staffer comes. Those are called staff delegations. And you'll hear this term, CODEL and staff del. And that's a very common term that if you're in this world, you'll start hearing. And basically, it means you've got a visit coming. If it's a CODEL, it's members. The actual congressmen and senators are coming to talk to you. So you better be ready for them, and be able to talk to them about and justify why they need to do certain things. Sometimes the congressmen or staffers are not happy with a program and the way it's been going, or a weapon system. And they're going to come down to have very frank talks, if you will. And what you want to do is you want to provide your commander with the best information so that they can fully explain why they need it so badly. You're basically educating them. You're educating and informing. You're getting the info so that they can educate and inform the congressman. And oh, by the way, we're doing a lot of the back and forth in the background too. Like the staffers are coming to us, and we are relaying back and forth with them answers to questions. That's really our biggest job. And we're communicating. That's all we are. We're communicators with Congress, and we're trying to build communication by building the relationship so that they trust what we're saying. And that includes bad news, by the way. There's always going to be some kind of bad news. Right. Southern Command is responsible for the Guantanamo operations. That's always a very contentious issue on many sides, right? For many reasons. And sometimes things happen there. And, it happened when I was there. And you've got to be able to call that person before it hits the news, preferably, because they're not going to be happy if they hear about it, drinking their coffee, watching it on the news in the morning. If that member doesn't know, they're mad. And it's just going to roll down to you. So you call them when something happens that is not going to be positive press, and you say, hey, here's what's going on. Here's what happened. Here's what really happened in case you hear otherwise. People are starting to maybe think this or that. So our whole job in life really is to build a relationship with the Congress, their staff, the members, build the trust. And that way they know they can come to us. And it works both ways. The majority of the time we're building this trust, and you start to really feel a kinship with these staffers. Most of the time we're working with the staffers. You typically get called or written to by a member but I do have a great story about that. When they're getting ready to meet with the force, they're coming down to meet with the 4-star or one of the other senior leaders in the Defense Department. But there have been times where we were told, it's very rare, but where you have a really strong contact. And I've seen times where you're told you're going to get this, and then it doesn't come in the bill. And they lied to you. They probably had to because of their member. They didn't want you to know before because they knew you would, I hate to say lie. It's such a strong word, but you know what I mean. They couldn't tell you. They couldn't tell you. It doesn't happen often, but I have seen it happen. And, you get over it after a while, but that And it happens the other way too sometimes, right? Like sometimes you know that you're going to take the beating. I used to say I'm literally the punching bag for both sides. One of my friends who worked in this job, one of the jobs before I did, it wasn't at Southern Command, it was somewhere else. He would say that the deepest part of the Potomac was between the Pentagon and Congress, because people would go over, like they would be just crying, like sometimes they don't want to go over, they don't want to talk to the Congress. And sometimes they tell you can't tell them this, and it's coming from a high level. It's very rare, but it happens, it happens with all agencies.
Wow.
So, and you basically get beat up. I've been beaten up many times. I get it from the one side who doesn't want to go up to talk to Congress. I used to work policy issues. I used to work, I've worked various issues, even sometimes some, joint acquisition type things. The Congress is screaming at me, and I'm just the liaison in between, the punching bag. I'm literally taking it from both, getting punched in the head from both sides and trying to make the peace. And I guess that's really part of my role, is I'm the peacemaker. I have to come up with a plan that both sides are happy with. Sometimes it's negotiation. We've negotiated, they'll cut some of our funding by half. And then we have to negotiate back maybe $400 million. Can be big bucks. It's big bucks. This isn't chump change, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Now, how does that relate to what you're doing now for small businesses and medium-sized businesses?
So, yeah, it was really interesting, because there are differences. What I like now is I'm not quite that punching bag. Now, what I get to do is, there is a big difference. It's very similar type work, but now, the businesses are excited to get anything usually. So it depends what type of business you're working with, right? Like there's the large businesses, and a lot of the big defense contractors all have their congressional offices, and they're all sitting on Capitol Hill, and they're engaging all the time. Okay. Sometimes they might call in a favor, and I've had that happen. In fact, that's kind of how I started my business. Is somebody had a favor, they knew I knew some people, and they asked me for some help. But smaller businesses, they may or may not already be working with Congress, or maybe they have one little contract, but maybe the government also wants them to scale it up, but they don't have the money. They didn't make the cut when everything was being debated up at the higher levels. So then they can go to Congress, and Congress isn't going to give the Defense Department or any other agency everything that they ask for every year. So they can go to, businesses. There's a way to communicate with Congress to ask for things. And especially if they have support from various offices, there's a way that, maybe because it's just new technology and it's just rolling out, but it's a huge need for this department group or program. You talk to Congress, and they always are juggling money around, and they might feel that, hey, that need is important. Whoever it goes to, but they understand the need. And that's what I like is, that you can do things a little quicker sometimes by going to Congress rather than having to go through a traditional budget cycle, which it may never make it up to the final cut anyway. But Congress will oftentimes see needs. And they can add funding for various programs and services. And so what's great is you don't get punched as hard, because if they already don't have the money, right? And if you get them the money, they're super happy. And it can be a great investment for them to work with congressional lobbyists, if you will, because it helps them to understand the process, know who to talk to, how to explain what they need to say so people understand. So the communication is very similar. That's why I think I can be pretty good at what I do, is I know how to communicate with Congress. I know what's not going to go over well. I understand how to message Congress, and you don't want to waste their time because they're very busy. They're taking tons and tons of meetings every day. But I also think it's important to be involved in the process, because if you're not, well, you're not going to get it. You're not going to get anything.
So at what point should someone right, determine like this is the right approach to take? Are there
My opinion,
types of companies or specific type size of companies? Because small business, by the way, and I apologize if anyone's new to my channel, but small businesses goes from right mom and pop up to hundreds of millions of dollars, right? A small business is very broad term,
right,
right? I
right,
would say in our business when we do BD services, we don't typically like to take clients that are doing less than 5 million a year.
okay,
This doesn't make sense because they typically don't have staff, they don't have a back office, and so we need some of that to help deal with some of the things that were asked of us to provide to the government that we need to then ask of them. And if we're dealing with just the owners who's also trying to actually be an owner operator, it's really difficult for us to work with that customer. So
gotcha.
I don't know how that falls when it comes to this kind of stuff.
So what I like to do is if somebody comes to me, first you gotta evaluate the problem. Like, what are they really trying to do? Because it's not always just about money. It could even be a policy change that needs to be
Okay.
fixed within the legislative language. So you've got to hear, well, what's their problem? What's the main problem? And it could be if it's a large company, they might already be working an issue and they just need a little more help. But if it's a small business, like you're asking, typically a lot of the ones that I work with may never have even Congress isn't in their lexicon. They don't know anything about this, right? They're doing BD, they're trying to get in through the acquisition and contracting channels, and they're trying to get into a program of record eventually that, they're trying to get contracts, and then ultimately they'd love to be a program of record. But it could be ideally, I mean, it could be for some of it just really depends on the size of the business and what they're trying to do and how big what the department is. Are they supportive? I mean, it could be, usually it's around 5-10 million, something like that. It could be a couple million. And sometimes you'll only get a couple million. You'll ask for 5 or 10 million. You might get a couple million. They want to see what you're going to do. And then maybe the next year you go back and they're like, oh, you did a good job, because they're going to look back at what you did with that money. Congress does that with everything. That's why they make the cuts. I'll throw this out. This is important, actually. The reason Congress makes cuts is if the people they gave money to, if the agency or the program didn't use it properly, what they gave them the year before, and now they're asking for the same amount, they're going to make the cut because they didn't execute all that money. And then it went back to the Treasury. And they're not happy with that. It could have gotten reprogrammed if it happened early enough, but it happened too close to the end of the fiscal year. Forget it. They're not happy. So they're going to say, hey, you didn't even use the money last year. Why should I give you the same amount? And that actually kind of makes some sense, right?
That's to me.
Like, yeah, it makes sense. So that's why you have to go communicate. Well, this is the circumstance that is the reason we couldn't do it. We couldn't spend it. That's not going to happen for X, Y, and Z. And it's the same type of thing with the small businesses. They feel like they're going to, especially if they're just getting started and this is the first time that they're doing some of these projects with the government, some of them are ready to go. And that's the best client. If they've already done some demonstrations within the Department of Defense, which is who I primarily work with, by the way, that's why I keep going back to them. But if they've done some demonstrations and they're already showing some progress, and maybe they just need there's just a little bit of money that's needed to push this technology forward, and they may be willing to give it to allow the department to try to get, whoever's best to do it, honestly. I mean, sometimes, there's competition and different things, but so that's what, but typically it's around, I'd say 5 million maybe, but it's a potential big return on investment for them, especially if they're not making too much and they want to do this work with the government and they want to get the in initially, and then it can start growing rapidly. And that's what you often see is they do good work. And then the next year they'll say, yeah, we like that. That did a lot of good for the government. We're willing to give this program more. And yeah.
Let me ask you a question because now my brain's turning. What about, for example, a nonprofit organization? Could they go
So
in
I
and do the same thing?
So they have lobbyists, yeah, for various reasons. I don't typically work with the nonprofits.
Okay.
There's a lot of lobbyists who kind of specialize in that. But there's lots of different ways. Sometimes they're partnering with universities, there's lots of different partnerships. So everybody's talking to Congress about what's important. And the money, is flowing. It can flow in various ways. So there's things that are going on all around in that capacity. Yeah.
The reason why I asked is that one of the issues that we've seen personally that, for example, all of the things that I'm doing is designed around bridging the small business gap. There's been a steep decline in the number of small businesses participating in the industrial base for 2 decades.
In the what? I'm sorry? Participating in what?
So we went from 121,000 small businesses to 66,000 small businesses.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Over 2 decades. And it doesn't seem like the government's been able to solve that problem.
Right.
So, we do a lot of programming around that, my organization. And so I'm wondering, is that something that we could take to Congress and say, hey, we've done some programming around this. Could we get some funds to expand our programs?
It's a good question. I think, like I said, I'm not the expert within the NGOs. I can reach out to some people and talk to them, to see if, but I know that there's different ways that people partner, and sometimes it is a collective lobby that they'll do with the NGOs. Do you know what I mean? Like they'll go up and talk about the issue. That's why often there's the members are involved in caucuses, areas of interest to them. So they can talk about these things, and so typically the NGO want the money to go somewhere. It may not be specifically for them, right? So typically the money, I think, again, this isn't my area of expertise, but I'm more defense and security specifically, and I don't work a lot with the NGO side of the house, but I'm really more focused on the small businesses. But I think that collectively there are groups who will go to Congress, talk about it. It can be within a caucus meeting. It can be, to where they'll say, yeah, the universities are, because universities basically are, they're doing this similar type of work. A lot of they'll partner with industry a little bit, and they might talk about it. Money gets funneled into the areas where the need is, right? So instead of going directly to the NGO, it might go to where the need is. Instead, they show the need. So that's.
Well, that makes sense.
Again, I'm not the expert. I don't want to, I could have this wrong. Yeah.
So your area is primary technology companies?
It's funny. That just seems it could be anything. It can be anything, but it does seem like that's who is interested in, that's who's really there's a big push within technology companies. And maybe it's because there's folks coming from the commercial side of the house, and they're starting to see how much the department does and how they can get involved and showcase their technologies, because it's changing so fast.
Right.
So I try to help them figure out, well, who might be interested in it. I don't like to do a lot of business development, but that's a little, they kind of go hand in hand a little bit. Usually they have their own business development people. And that's where I kind of say I'm in the consulting side, because I make suggestions. Hey, have you thought about reaching out to this organization within the department, X, Y, or Z? And then if they need people, I do know a lot of people, and that's what I think my special skills. I know a lot of people. I know how to communicate with Congress. And because I make these connections often, they at least then can start the talk. If you can't even get in to start talking to somebody, the conversation won't happen, and you're not going to go anywhere. If I don't know somebody, I usually can reach out within 1 or 2 emails or phone calls and find out who the right person is. That's where I think for your area, because I've been in the business a long time. Yeah. And that's another important point. People recycle, like within DC, the parties flip. I always, in my business, you're bipartisan. You're going to help everybody, right? Well, you don't have to, but I try to. I try to help whoever I think is, a really good, strong company and would benefit the department. I mean, that's the whole reason you do this is if you see technologies or services that are good that you at least perceive are good, then you want to help these things get to the warfighter quicker. So that's where, you get excited to help them.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. We will have all the information about where to reach you. We'll share that publicly. But before we close out, let's talk about your other passions that's not related to this.
Okay.
You've done some work in the art world recently.
I have actually, and very excited about that actually. So I'm more of a fine artist, I think, than a photographer, but I do a lot of fine art photography. And I was very lucky to have my first showcase with some other great photographers here in Miami Beach. And it was up for a couple months. We had a show, a photography show, lots of different things. And I tend to focus on nature, wildlife. It was funny because I thought I'd start mostly with landscapes, and I do have some landscapes, but I think some of my wildlife and some of my foliage and flowers, they just seem to be the big hits. So, and I've started selling a few of my photos. So it's very exciting. I've just started that recently and hoping that continues. So fingers crossed.
Have you always wanted to be an artist?
So it is funny. I used to do art when I was younger. I used to paint a little bit, and I even painted. I never knew I was an artist when I was in, if I am an artist, right? But I'm in that space now. I love it. I think I've always had it in my blood. When I was in high school, I was nervous about taking any kind of art class because I loved photography, and I actually took the photography classes, but I never took the art class because I was worried I didn't want it to mess up my GPA, so that I didn't think I maybe had, I didn't know if I had talent. I really hadn't done much, right, other than photography. And then I had to take a class. I had moved my senior year, and I had to take a class in art to graduate. So I took a full year, and I loved it. My teacher was amazing. I loved drawing. I loved painting. I did it a little bit at the academy. They actually do offer some art classes there, and I took a couple of those art classes, and funny, I always planned to do it, and it's weird how time got away, but now I'm really, really getting devoted to it. So I started with the photography. It's just, I kept having friends ask me for some of my photos. I was happy to provide, those to them when they liked them. And now I just finally started to sell. So I love it. And I'm eager. I'm going to start painting again very soon. So this year. So hopefully I'll be getting more involved with that as well.
I love it. No, that's good stuff. Well, I want to definitely make sure we connect to your LinkedIn profile. I'm looking at some of your artwork here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My bull elk was a big favorite.
Your what?
The bull elk that I took Estes Park. That was a big favorite. Yeah.
And then a picture?
I did. I took that picture.
Tell us, how did you get that picture?
Oh my gosh. Wow. It was interesting. So somebody had told me that there was a bull elk hanging around. In Estes Park, they go through this rut season, which I didn't know anything about when I went there. But basically, they're like all over the town, and they're in mating, and some of the big bulls they fight. And the only thing I could think, somebody told me this one bull elk was by himself hanging out. And I couldn't believe it. I thought it was a statue first. I thought the guy was kidding. So I went and I looked and I saw it, and then I ran and grabbed my camera and I started to take some pictures, and he was hanging around for about 2-3 days. We think he may have gotten injured, but he wasn't with the regular pack, and he was right by my place where my hotel. He wasn't far away at all. And I went, and one day I just kept watching him, and I kept like having my camera ready and taking pictures, and I was watching him eat. And I was right there, and I was probably a little bit too close, but I did zoom. I did use my full zoom at that time. And he looked up at me, and I snapped and I got it. So I did have some protection. There was a small little fence about this big, like And there was a tree, and that's what I always heard, because I'm not a crazy person. I don't like
I was gonna-
go super close to lions. I had space. I mean, I had zoomed in quite a bit,
Okay.
but I think he would have outrun me if he decided to come, but he was just happy eating. And he had been there for 3 days. I was starting to feel like this real rapport and energy with him. And I felt pretty good. So I got in and then I got out of there.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Well, listen, we've been going for about an hour and a half now, so I want to respect your time. Why don't you go ahead and close us out with some parting words for the small businesses listening to this?
Oh, wow. Well, thank you first, Eric, for having me. I just think that for small businesses who have never engaged with the congressional aspect of, that have never engaged with Congress and worked and learned about it, I think that they should probably call somebody, it doesn't have to be me, but they should learn more about the process, because they could be, perhaps getting funding or changes to the policy that they never realized, and it could help them. So that's what we ultimately are trying to do, is help people.
Love it. I love it. I'm going to be reaching out to you about my things that I want changes in the policies. So I will reach out.
Okay. And I'm always willing to help learn more about, the NGO side of the house too.
Exactly. I think I have some things that I want changed that could benefit everyone as a whole and help solve some of these problems. So I'll be reaching
Okay.
out. Thank you so much for coming on today. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Look forward to seeing you somewhere in Miami soon.
Sounds great. Sounds great, Eric.
Thanks, my friend. Talk to you soon.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.